When I boarded the yacht, the party was at its most exciting moment. In the center of the crowd, Kieffer Tyson was lazily leaning on the sofa. A pure-looking girl sitting sideways next to him, seductively wrapping her arm around his neck. Men and women raised their champagne glasses, chanting "Kiss, kiss" in waves. The girl's cheeks were flushed, her eyes filled with desire and anticipation. Kieffer's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He smirked lazily, "Don't mess around, my wife is watching." Everyone turned to see me, and instantly quieted down, awkwardly calling out, "Mrs. Tyson." The girl sitting on Kieffer's lap glanced at me, showing no intention of getting off. She boldly clung to him, laughing coquettishly. "Doesn't this make it more exciting?" The scene immediately became lively again, with everyone tacitly waiting for a good show. Everyone knew that my marriage to Kieffer was practically non-existent. Kieffer's blatant promiscuity was well known, and the women around him naturally weren't afraid of me, the titular Mrs. Tyson. I ignored her and looked straight at Kieffer. Speaking calmly, "The media is gathered at the port, waiting for you to dock. Will you come back with me?" Kieffer's lips curled into a playful smile, unmoved. Seeing this, the girl became even more brazen, leaning into his arms and giving me a provocative smile. The sea was dotted with lights, and a speedboat zoomed towards us. Cameras pointed at us, shutters clicking, and the flashlights were blinding. I clenched my fingers, feeling a sting in my palm. We were photographed. I could foresee a storm waiting for me. Kieffer's mocking voice reached my ears, "Sure, Mrs. Tyson." He suddenly stood up, causing the girl in his arms to fall to the ground unprepared. "Mr. Tyson." She whimpered pitifully. Kieffer ignored her, walked to my side, clasped my waist, and leaned down. "Going home?" I clearly saw the malicious smile in his eyes. He deliberately let the paparazzi take these photos, because as long as he caused a scandal, the one punished would definitely be me. And he enjoyed causing trouble. I calmly held his hand that was on my waist. "Let's go." Kieffer let out a short, mocking laugh. I pretended not to hear it and pulled him away. It wasn't until we docked and got into the car that I let go of his hand. Kieffer grabbed it back, interlocking our fingers tightly. Speaking in a mocking tone, "Be professional, if we're acting, we should do it right." I frowned slightly, turned to look out the window, letting him be. We arrived at the Tyson family home. Kieffer squinted playfully at me and said, "Good luck for you." I knew what he meant and silently entered the house. "Grandma." I greeted politely. The old lady nodded, speaking warmly, "Your parents are waiting for you in the study, go see them." "Okay." I knew exactly what would happen. And the instigator of all this, Kieffer, had a faint smile on his lips. When I came out of the study, there was a slap mark on my face and a faint taste of blood at the corner of my mouth. Mrs. Tyson was a meticulous person. When she hit the face. After hitting, she resumed her elegant demeanor as a noblewoman. "Martha, you disappoint me so much. You can't even keep your own husband's heart, how ridiculous." I stood at the study door, still hearing the conversation inside. Kieffer's father, who hadn't said a word earlier, spoke. "Your son did something outrageous, why blame her?" Mrs. Tyson sneered. "Kieffer was mischievous before marrying her, but he wasn't this outrageous." She complained, "You forced him to marry a woman he doesn't love, of course he's upset." Kieffer's father sighed, "This marriage was arranged by our father, I had no choice." I turned and left. Walking through the long corridor, I suddenly thought of Theo Tyson. The pain in the corner of my mouth seemed to spread to my heart, making me feel indescribably uncomfortable. At the end of the corridor, the window was wide open. Kieffer was leaning against the windowsill with his arms crossed, the green branches outside swaying in the spring light. His face hidden in the backlight, unclear. I was about to pass by silently, when my wrist was grabbed. Kieffer's fingers brushed over the corner of my mouth. A light chuckle escaping his throat. "Tisk, they actually hit you this time." I uncomfortably pushed his hand away. Kieffer's long eyes looked at me with a faint smile. "Martha Foster, don't you know how to fight back?" I laughed along. Do I have the right to fight back? Kieffer didn't speak. Exactly. His tone was light but harsh. This is all your own doing, you deserve it. He left decisively. After leaving the Tyson family home, the driver took me to the sanatorium. Mrs. Tyson, Mrs. Foster's condition is not good. The nurse's words made my heart sink. I rushed into the ward. Seeing the thin woman on the bed, my eyes instantly filled with unbearable sorrow. What happened? I had visited a few days ago, and she had obviously improved. The nurse didn't dare to look at me. Madam saw the scandal about your husband online. Sweetie. The woman struggled to raise her hand. I grabbed her hand. Choking up, Mom. Her cloudy eyes filled with tears. Mom regrets forcing you. We thought we found the best match for you, but we didn't expect. I wiped her tears away. Soothing her gently, Mom, let's not talk about the past. After a long while, she cautiously asked, Can you ask Kieffer to come see me? My heart felt like it was being pierced by needles. Okay. I walked to the door. Took out my phone to call Kieffer. But he never answered. Finally, the secretary sent a message. Mr. Tyson left for Africa after leaving home. He hasn't landed yet. What is he doing there? He said he was going hunting. I held the phone in silence for a long time. My mother never got to see Kieffer. In the lonely, silent spring night, I lost my mom forever. When the funeral ended, Kieffer finally called back, but I didn't answer. Letting the ringtone ring and die, over and over. The next day I went back to the Foster family home, quietly packing my mother's belongings alone. Someone pushed the door open, stood silently for a long time. I didn't turn around, speaking coldly. Kieffer, I don't want to see you right now. Kieffer didn't speak. Stood for a while, then left. After packing up the belongings, I passed through the living room. The Foster family was gathered, coaxing a boy about 10 years old. When they saw me standing at the staircase, they awkwardly stopped laughing. My father waved, Martha. He pointed to the dining table set with dishes. Stay for a meal before you go. No. I looked at him quietly. Dad, this is the last time I'll call you Dad. The man's face instantly turned cold. What did you say? I ignored him, smiling to myself. I owe nothing to the Foster family anymore. He was used to my obedience. Suddenly unable to accept it. You want to cut ties with the Foster family? Yes. I turned coldly. Martha Foster. He roared in anger, grabbing an ashtray. The sound of wind came from behind, and in an instant, I was pulled into someone's arms. The ashtray hit the shoulder of the person in front of me with a dull thud. I looked up in a daze, meeting Kieffer's deep, sinister eyes. Mr. Tyson, The perpetrator was scared speechless. Kieffer didn't even look at him, pulling me away with big strides. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Back in the car, none of us spoke. The shadows of the trees intertwined under the night sky, casting a quiet scene through the car window. He lowered his eyes. Sorry, I haven't turned on my phone since I left. In my memory, this was the first time in 5 years of marriage that Kieffer Tyson apologized seriously. In the past, whenever he said sorry, it was always in a teasing and insincere manner, purely to annoy me. A young master venturing into the East African savannah, indulging his wild nature. Such a colorful life leaves no room for mundane matters of life and death. According to the script of Mrs. Tyson, I was supposed to express understanding. But at this moment, my heart was restless and unsettled, no longer wanting to respond to him. Kieffer furrowed his brow, hesitating for a long while before finally speaking. Martha, can you? The sudden ringing of the phone interrupted Kieffer's words. He seemed inexplicably angry, with no place to vent. He answered the call and snapped, Are you out of your mind? In the confined space, his voice was amplified, and I could clearly hear the lively, crisp voice of a girl on the other end. Kieffer! She wasn't afraid of him at all. Her aggrieved tone carried a hint of coquettishness. What do you mean by leaving me alone in Africa? Kieffer impatiently raised an eyebrow. Serves you right. Kieffer, you have no heart. The girl accused angrily. I don't care, come and get me right now. What are you thinking? Kieffer scoffed lightly. If you don't come, I'll make a scene with your wife, and you'll regret it. Kieffer's eyes narrowed slowly, yet he smiled, his face exuding a chilling aura. His words were indifferent. All right. The girl seemed momentarily unsure of his intentions, her arrogance diminished. I'm not threatening you, it's just. At this moment, Kieffer pushed open the car door and leisurely walked aside, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear as he went out of the car. The voice faded away, and the wind rushed in through the slightly open window. Phoebe, the secretary, called. Vice President Foster, Mr. Tyson is trending again. The call Kieffer received explained everything. During his 10 days in Africa, he had a girl by his side. It's no surprise that there were rumors. I opened my social media account. In the photos that appeared, Kieffer was playing with a hunting rifle, and a fiery, bold girl was leaning on his gun, the two of them standing intimately side by side. I recognized the girl in the photos. Born in Chinatown, Kara, flamboyant and wild. She and Kieffer were truly a match. I had seen her twice. The first time was in distant London. I traveled thousands of miles to find him. One night, Kieffer, drunk, pressed me against the floor-to-ceiling window, his demeanor carefree. Do you know how to kiss? He smiled roguishly, step by step enticing me. Relax, open your lips. I resisted awkwardly, falling into his eyes like an unknown temptation. Kieffer's eyes darkened, and his descending kiss gradually lost control. Just as a certain desire was about to explode, a girl with smoky eye makeup and a miniskirt suddenly barged in. She asked in a shocked voice, Kieffer, what are you doing? Kieffer, unbothered by the interruption, smiled nonchalantly, teaching my fiancé how to kiss. The girl looked at me, then at Kieffer. Like a wounded little beast, she grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the bar and smashed it on the ground. She glared at Kieffer fiercely, her eyes red. You're a bastard. She threw out the sentence and slammed the door as she left. Throughout the entire process, Kieffer was like a spectator, leaning leisurely against the wall, his expression indifferent. The farce began and ended, and the air fell silent. I wondered curiously, she had the key to Kieffer's apartment. The dampness from his kiss still lingered on my lips, and I asked, do you like her? Kieffer tilted his head and smiled, do you want to control me? I pressed my lips together, unsure of what to say. Seeing my discomfort, Kieffer's smile grew even more wanton. Martha Foster, you can't be too greedy. In Kieffer's world, our relationship was merely a contract devoid of any emotional attachment. And for me, desiring both the benefits of being Mrs. Tyson and emotional fidelity was overly greedy. I lowered my head in silence, not arguing. The second time I saw Kara was at my wedding with Kieffer. That day, Kieffer left me and the guests, walking out of the banquet hall. I chased after him to persuade him to stay. At the entrance, a fleet of luxury cars formed by a group of young masters was ostentatious and eye-catching. Kieffer took off his suit jacket, tossed his tie into my arms. His thin lips curled into a malicious smile. Congratulations, Mrs. Tyson. He swung his long legs over a motorcycle, the roar echoing down the long street. On the back seat, Kara, with her fingers brushing her eyebrow, gave me a bright smile. Goodbye, Mrs. Tyson. I stood in the warm spring sunlight, watching the motorcycle speed away. The hem of the girl's dress fluttered like a flower in the wind. Kara had been chasing after him for so many years, her feelings were truly deep and sincere. The scandals of the Tyson family's young master were nothing new. But during his mother-in-law's funeral, he took a girl to Africa for hunting. Dashing yet heartless. I watched silently, feeling a chill in my heart. The car door opened and closed, the faint scent of bergamot in the air just enough to dispel the trace of smoke he brought in. I didn't look up, but I couldn't ignore the piercing gaze fixed on my face. After taking this call, Kieffer's inexplicable anger seemed to have been soothed. He spoke nonchalantly, come with me to the cemetery tomorrow. My finger paused slightly as I swiped the screen, no need. Kieffer raised his voice slightly, are you angry? I looked up and saw the inquisitive look in his eyes. He seemed determined to find some other emotion on my calm face. I just think it's unnecessary. I turned off my phone screen. A missed opportunity is a missed opportunity. If the timing is wrong, no amount of compensation will help. Kieffer half squinted his eyes. What if I say it is necessary? He was getting serious, which I didn't expect. In the past, Kieffer was always carefree and rarely invested effort in anything. I pressed my lips together. As long as you're happy. No one could stop him from doing what he wanted. The next day, we arrived at the cemetery. Kieffer stopped me from unbuckling my seatbelt. I'll go by myself. Watching his desolate figure disappear into the green cemetery, I thought, Kieffer can be quite perplexing at times. The phone rang unexpectedly. Kieffer had left his phone on the central console. I glanced at it. It was Kara. No one answered, and the persistent ringing kept echoing in the car. Annoyed, I put on my headphones and closed my eyes. I didn't notice when Kieffer got back in the car. His fingers touched my ear, slightly cool. I opened my eyes, and Kieffer took my headphones. Your phone has been ringing for a while. I explained instinctively. Oh. Kieffer lowered his eyes, his long fingers playing with the headphones. Sensing his off mood, I didn't know what to say. The car fell silent. He opened the window, turned his head to look at me. I remember when we were kids, I always went to your house to eat noodles. I glanced at him quickly. Surprisingly, the young Master Tyson still remembered a bowl of noodles. I thought of my mother and responded lightly, yeah, you could eat 3 bowls in one go. Kieffer raised an eyebrow disdainfully, who eats like you, 2 noodles and you're full. I pressed my lips together, unable to refute. Back then, my mom's cooking skills were really lacking, and the only decent dish she could make was scallion oil noodles. I had eaten it so many times growing up that I prayed it wouldn't be noodles every time I sat at the table. But Kieffer loved it the first time he tried it and praised my mom to the skies. My mom beamed and warmly invited Kieffer to come over often for meals. Kieffer didn't hesitate, coming over every few days, and scallion oil noodles became a staple in our house. I was so fed up, I couldn't eat it anymore. Kieffer stretched his long arm out the window, his tone carrying a hint of regret. We won't be able to eat it anymore. The sadness of my mother's passing surfaced, and I looked out the window, speechless. It had been a long time since Kieffer and I had such a relaxed and warm interaction. Perhaps because he missed my mother's funeral, Kieffer temporarily restrained his usual carefree attitude. The phone on the central console rang, breaking the rare warmth. Kieffer sat back in the driver's seat, phone to his ear, steering with one hand. As the car started, a girl's clear voice came through the speaker. She was very angry, boldly and directly questioning, Kieffer, where the hell have you been? Kieffer's phone was connected to the car's Bluetooth, and he forgot to switch to a private mode. It's Kara, I knew. He didn't intend to avoid me at all. In a lazy tone, he asked, where are you? She mentioned a hotel name, then her voice turned pitiful. I've been flying for over 10 hours, I'm exhausted. Oh, Kara is back in the country. I put my headphones back on and turned the volume up to maximum. The call ended quickly, and Kieffer glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his thin lips moving slightly. I could tell from his lip movements that he asked, drive you home? Yeah. I closed my eyes and responded. Kieffer stepped on the gas, and the car suddenly accelerated. Caught off guard, my body lurched forward, and I opened my eyes in surprise. In the rearview mirror, Kieffer's flamboyant face was reflected. He focused on the road ahead, with a slight, mischievous smile on his lips. At the door, Kieffer dropped me off, turned the car around, and quickly disappeared down the road. I stood there for a moment, then turned and went inside. These past few days, I quietly saw my mother off. But in the silent nights, grief seeped in like threads, filling every corner. Before, even though my mother was ill and lived in a nursing home for years, I still had a place to go. Now, looking around, I couldn't find home anymore. This house, luxurious and empty, was nothing but a lavish cage. Years of habit woke me up at 6 o'clock sharp. Perhaps I had cried unconsciously in my sleep, as my face felt tight from dried tears. I quietly emptied my mind, sorted out all my emotions, and got up. Seeing a shadow by the window, I paused on my way downstairs. The long spring night, with the faint morning light cut into fragments by the trees outside the window, cast a play of light and shadow on his body. He had just woken up and was still in his pajamas. Your expression, Kieffer turned his head slightly, is quite intriguing. I walked to the bar and poured a glass of warm water, calmly saying, I thought you weren't coming back last night. Seeing him was indeed a bit unexpected. Didn't he need to stay at the hotel to accompany someone? Kieffer's thin lips curled playfully. What, Mrs. Tyson, are you planning to catch me in the act? I had just taken a sip of water and almost choked at his words. In the past, no matter how reckless Kieffer was, as long as he didn't cross the line, I wouldn't interfere. But his years of mischief, flaunted every time, had made the headlines with one scandal after another. As Mrs. Tyson, I had become a joke as he wished. He was the reckless one, but the Tyson family would always hold me accountable. I knew every time I went to find him in the nightlife, it annoyed him. But what could I do? As long as I was still Mrs. Tyson, I had to clean up after him. I have no such plans. I swallowed the bitterness with the warm water and reminded, just keep a low profile and don't get caught. Kieffer squinted through the rising smoke. Sorry, I'm naturally high profile. I had nothing more to say. After finishing my water, I went out for my usual morning run. Afterwards, I washed up and got ready. In the garage, I ran into Kieffer, who was about to go to the company. He frowned slightly. Martha, the company does offer bereavement leave. I know. I nodded. 15 days, ending today. Kieffer lowered his eyes, glancing at me. Suddenly, he leaned over, resting his hand on my shoulder, his fingers lightly brushing my neck. A tingling sensation. I removed his hand. We're going to be late. Kieffer gave a lazy smile. The Tyson family is really lucky to have a daughter-in-law like you. Ignoring his sarcasm, I got in the car and drove out of the garage. Not far ahead, a blue sports car roared past. Kieffer rested his elbow on the window edge, disappearing into the traffic. I held the steering wheel steadily, frowning slightly. Did he think the road was a racetrack? With work piled up for over 10 days, I buried myself in the documents as soon as I got to the office. Phoebe, my secretary, half opened the door and peeked in. Vice President Foster, Mr. Tyson wants to see you in his office. I guessed it wouldn't be anything good. Though I was mentally prepared, I still felt a bit uneasy when I pushed the door open. Kieffer lounged lazily in his chair, and on the long desk in front of him sat a woman, swinging her pale legs leisurely. She faced Kieffer, so I couldn't see her face. But from her bold and hot outfit, I could guess it was Kara. I looked at Kieffer. Mr. Tyson, you wanted to see me? Kieffer raised his chin slightly at me, lifting an eyebrow. Hey, my wife's here. Hearing his tone and that address, I felt a headache coming on. Trouble was here again. I didn't expect Kara to actually follow through and come to find me. Kara turned her head, her eyes unabashedly scanning me up and down. Mrs. Tyson, we meet again. She smiled brightly and confidently, without a hint of embarrassment. As if the person sitting there was her husband. I suddenly felt like laughing. Seeing her before, I always worried that Kieffer treated her differently from other girls. Seeing her now, she seemed no different from the other women around Kieffer. It was my mindset that had changed. Hello. I replied politely. She swiftly turned her body, resting her chin on her hand. In less than 5 years, Mrs. Tyson, you already look like a professional elite. She blinked mischievously. I heard you're a vice president now. She was insinuating that I got my position through Kieffer. I smiled slightly, got in through connections. Not expecting my frankness, Kara was momentarily stunned. A low, deep laugh rolled from Kieffer's throat. He leaned to one side of the chair, propping his face with the back of his hand, looking at me with some appreciation. I lowered my eyes. Kieffer. Kara was displeased. I want to get in through connections and work at your company too. Kieffer lazily curled his lips. But you're not Mrs. Tyson. Kara was taken aback. Whose side are you on, anyway? Kieffer smiled nonchalantly and didn't respond. Kieffer! That's enough. He turned around leisurely. With your lifestyle of partying at night and sleeping during the day, do you even have time to work? Kara pouted. I can just come home earlier in the evening. Why don't you just sleep at the bar? You're mocking me. The two of them bickered back and forth, completely ignoring my presence. I lightly parted my lips. Mr. Tyson, if there's nothing else, I'll get back to work. Kieffer gave me a meaningful glance. Sure. I turned to leave, but Kara wasn't having it. Hey, don't go yet. Seeing I didn't stop, she jumped off the table and chased after me. Mrs. Tyson. Her voice, laced with a smile, reached me slowly from behind. I slightly turned my head. Is there something else? She wanted to cause trouble, and Kieffer indulged her, even calling me over to her. Wasn't that enough? Nothing much. Kara's red lips curved into a smile. I just wanted to tell you, those days Kieffer was in Africa, he was with me. I mused, her phrasing was quite familiar. One day after marrying Kieffer, I suddenly received a message from an overseas number. Not too long, not too short. The short part was the text, just one line: the 4 years Kieffer spent in London, he was with me. Who do you think you are? The long part was the time I spent reading it, over and over again. Time has passed, and it's hard to remember what I was thinking then. I only recall the heartache. I didn't reply at the time, but now I felt indifferent. Who do I think I am? His childhood friend? His wife by arranged marriage? I nodded coldly. Yes, I know. Mrs. Tyson is so magnanimous? Of course. She said knowingly, an arranged marriage in a wealthy family is just a matter of interests. Who would be foolish enough to have real feelings? Her implication was clear. I was the tool for the arranged marriage, she and Kieffer were the true love. In this era where the narrative praises the unloved one as the third party in relationships, I was obviously the first, yet I became the third wheel in someone else's love story. Alas, I must be really pathetic. I couldn't help but smile. You're right. Kara's smile was starting to falter. She tried hard to disgust and provoke me, but it felt like she was punching cotton, leaving her very dissatisfied. I ignored her and threw myself back into work. Saturday morning, Kieffer still didn't come home. I picked up my phone and sent him a message. 10 o'clock, see you at the old mansion gate. If we can't appear loving together, we should at least show up at the same time. As usual, Kieffer didn't reply. But he shouldn't be absent. I arrived on time, and within a few minutes, Kieffer's car sped over. In the passenger seat of the sports car, Kara had abandoned her usual flamboyance and was dressed like a lady. As the car drove past, she waved at me. Morning, Mrs. Tyson. I didn't expect Kieffer to be so outrageous this time, daring to openly bring someone home. After the old Mr. Tyson, Kieffer's grandfather's death, the other members of the Tyson family couldn't control Kieffer's misdeeds outside and could only turn a blind eye. But the Tyson family prided itself on its integrity, and they would never allow a mistress to come to the house. Kieffer strode in with long steps. I walked in leisurely, with Kara trailing behind, carrying a bunch of gift boxes. Mrs. Tyson, could you help me see if Kieffer's family will like these gifts? I had no desire to respond to her and continued walking. Kara persisted. I heard his parents don't quite like you. Do you think they will like me? Hearing this, I paused slightly. My gaze swept over her from head to toe. Kara waited for my answer with a smile. I tugged at the corner of my lips, smiled faintly, and continued walking without saying a word. She seemed to think I was provoking her. Unwilling to fall behind, she quickened her pace and went in ahead of me. Mrs. Tyson, Kieffer's mother, draped in a shawl, gracefully descended the stairs. Seeing Kara and me walk in one after the other, and then glancing at Kieffer lazily playing with a teacup on the sofa, she immediately understood what was going on. I lowered my eyes quietly, acting as if it had nothing to do with me. Kara raised a sweet smile. Mrs. Tyson, I'm Kara, nice to meet you. These are some small gifts I prepared for you, I hope. Yes, they are quite small. Mrs. Tyson interrupted blandly. Kara's smile froze. Today is a family gathering, we don't entertain outsiders. Mrs. Tyson looked at the butler. See the guest out. Yes, madam. The butler gestured politely. Miss Kara, please. Kara didn't expect the scene at all, and was so embarrassed her face flushed red and white. She called out pitifully, Kieffer. Kieffer sat there loosely, playing with the teacup in his long fingers, not even lifting his eyelids. I suddenly felt a bit sorry for Kara. A playboy like Kieffer, his affection is like a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Enchanting, but not real. When Kara left, her eyes were filled with humiliating tears. The atmosphere of the family gathering was not affected by her appearance at all. Only the Tyson grandmother raised her cane and lightly tapped Kieffer's arm. "Behave yourself and don't bring such people home." "It annoys me." Kieffer leaned back lazily, speaking innocently, "You're wronging me. Even if she wanted to come, you couldn't stop her?" "That's exactly right." Kieffer raised his eyebrows playfully. "I can't exactly hit a woman, can I?" Unable to argue with him, the Tyson grandmother glared at him. Then she lovingly waved me over. "Martha, sit next to Grandma." Perhaps Kieffer had really gone too far this time, as the Tyson grandmother spoke to me for a long while, comforting me. I listened obediently, maintaining the demeanor of a proper granddaughter-in-law. After she finished talking to me, she looked at Kieffer and changed the subject. "You need to settle down. It's been almost 5 years since you got married, and there's still no news about a child." "What you're saying?" Kieffer's tone was casual. "It's as if I can have a child on my own if I settle down." My brow twitched heavily. Kieffer glanced at me leisurely at this moment, with a playful and provocative look. Before the Tyson grandmother could turn her focus to me, I stood up calmly. "Grandma, I'm going to the restroom." I dawdled for quite a while before heading back to the living room. The thick carpet on the floor made my steps feel light and floaty. The Tyson grandmother was still talking to Kieffer. "Martha is a good girl, you shouldn't always mess around." Kieffer drawled mockingly, "A good girl deserves a good man. It's a pity to marry me." "Glad you know that." The Tyson grandmother didn't hold back either. "If you break her heart, you won't have a wife anymore." Kieffer, annoyed, frowned and got up to leave. I sat back next to the Tyson grandmother nonchalantly, as if I hadn't heard anything. We stayed until evening when it was the Tyson grandmother's bedtime, and then we went our separate ways. I had driven myself, not caring that Kieffer left first. After driving for a while, I saw Kieffer's car in the rearview mirror. This time, he didn't rush to overtake me. He patiently followed my car all the way back to our marital home. There was no need to speak to each other. I went straight upstairs to wash up. When I came out of the bathroom, drying my hair, I was caught off guard by the sight of Kieffer leaning against the wall. The room was dark, with dim light filtering through the frosted glass of the bathroom door, casting a hazy glow on him. The slightly open robe collar revealed the tan line of his chest muscles, exuding a hint of sensuality. I remained silent. What's wrong with him? Coming in without making a sound, just listening to someone shower. Finished? Kieffer raised an eyebrow, a certain desire ready to burst in his eyes. My grip on the towel tightened. "What's up?" At my words, Kieffer's Adam's apple bobbed as he let out a low laugh. He reached out wantonly, hooking my neck, leaning down, staring into my eyes. "What do you think?" I turned my eyes away, staying silent. Kieffer's fingers restlessly tugged at my collar. "You heard today as well." His warm breath lingered on my shoulder and neck. He grinned mischievously. "Grandma said she wants a grandchild." As the deep-seated chill in my heart reared its ugly head, I pressed down on Kieffer's hand. "Kieffer, enough is enough." Kieffer often invoked the pretext of marital duties with great success. Upon hearing my cold refusal, his aggressive actions halted abruptly. He withdrew, looking down at me with an intense gaze. After a long pause, he sneered, "Martha Foster, can't keep up the act anymore?" I pressed my lips together and answered honestly, "Yes, I don't want to pretend anymore." His eyes narrowed, the smile fading away, replaced by a cold glint. We stood in silent confrontation. The tension was about to explode when Kieffer suddenly turned around and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Water droplets from my damp hair fell onto the back of my hand, and I heard the roar of his sports car from downstairs. Kieffer was gone. I turned silently and walked to the balcony. This 3-story villa was a lavish wedding gift from the Tyson family to Kieffer and me. Situated at the best location along the West River, the balcony offered a clear view of the most beautiful river scenery. I quietly watched, just as I had done for over 1,000 nights. Letting the spring night breeze take away the dampness from my hair. The long and quiet riverside road stretched out, with dim lights fading into the distance. The sports car became a streak of light in the night, racing away. A word popped into my mind: killjoy. I knew Kieffer well. When he was upset, he always needed to find something to vent his anger on. For example, at our wedding, he left me to go racing. I don't know what was wrong with him. He drove like he didn't care about his life. His companions were scared by him and they hurriedly called his father. His father personally went to bring him back. At that time, Kieffer's grandfather, the old Mr. Tyson, was still alive, and he never indulged Kieffer. That time, he beat him particularly hard, and no one in the family dared to intervene. Kieffer, with his stubborn nature, knelt on the ground, back straight, not uttering a single word of complaint. He refused to yield. In the end, I hugged him, using my body to shield him from the old Mr. Tyson's cane. The old Mr. Tyson couldn't stop in time and struck my shoulder. I groaned in pain, meeting Kieffer's dark, fierce gaze. "Martha, get out of my way," he said. The roar of the sports car echoed from afar. Kieffer had vented his anger and calmed down. The car stopped along Riverside Road. I squinted slightly and could vaguely see the figure standing by the car. The night outlined his tall figure as he lit a cigarette in the quiet. The flame flickered and went out, leaving only a red glow between his fingers. I had watched his departing figure with various emotions countless times in the still years. Now, looking again, I felt nothing but emptiness in my heart. Even the resentment I had harbored because of my mother's death had vanished. Finally, there was nothing left. March 28th, an auspicious day for weddings. It's the anniversary of Kieffer and my wedding. In the world of wealthy families, such marriages often become glamorous social events. Every year, the Tyson family would throw a grand banquet on this day. Kieffer and I played the part of a loving couple, creating picture-perfect moments for the media. Everyone knew that the marriage of the Tyson family's heir was a PR masterpiece by the Tyson Group's headquarters. Our happiness was all thanks to their efforts. The public, while gossiping about Kieffer's endless string of affairs, also had to swallow the facade of our perfect marriage. It must have been quite a contradiction for them. A few days before our 5th anniversary, the planning team from Tyson Group's headquarters called me. "Mrs. Tyson." A man's formal voice came through the phone. "We have arranged everything for your and Mr. Tyson's 5th wedding anniversary. The itinerary has been sent to your email." I listened without responding. "The gift you are to give Mr. Tyson will be delivered to you on the day." I finally agreed with something Kieffer had said. This marriage was a play from start to finish. And Kieffer and I were the lead actors. I smiled. "No need, I'll choose the gift myself this year." "This." He hesitated but eventually agreed. Just before ending the call, he added, "You and Mr. Tyson are truly in sync." He also said he would choose his own gift this year. "You two really think alike." I smiled silently, finding it somewhat amusing. Kieffer had always been particularly cooperative when it came to our anniversary events. Under the flash of cameras, he would make intimate gestures, completely different from the reckless playboy in the tabloids, his eyes filled with tender affection. But during our embraces, his lips would deliberately brush against my neck. His lowered voice full of mockery, "Mrs. Tyson, you're doing a great job acting." I maintained my smile, the affection in my eyes a mix of real and fake under the flashlights. "How do you know I'm only acting?" "Tisk." Kieffer tightened his grip, forcing me against his chest. "The sound of your heart breaking is much clearer than the affection in your eyes." My whole body tensed, and Kieffer also exerted force. Under the barrage of flashlights, we were like two trapped beasts tearing at each other in secret. We couldn't avoid one name. Theo Tyson.